We were all wrong about Galactic Nova, and the true villain of Kirby Air Riders who wanted to destroy planet Popstar remains shrouded in mystery. Yeah, that should be a good hook. Also, hi, so it's been a little bit since I've uploaded. I promise I am working on new videos, but in the meantime I wanted to hop on and make a quick video on some recent topic that gives me an excuse to talk about Kirby more. For those who don't know, Nintendo recently published a developer interview with Sakurai where he gives a lot of insight into the planning and development of Kirby Air Riders. Or maybe they're still currently publishing it? It's split into multiple parts and they release a new part every couple of days for some reason. But anyway, in the latest part, Sakurai talks about Road Trip, the story mode of Air Riders, and after explaining that he wanted to make the story about the machines themselves rather than the riders, Sakurai gives a brief story overview, and this is where things get interesting, because even though it's only a couple of sentences, we get some details here that were definitely not in the game. Here's what he says. The story centers on Zora, who was flung into space by accident. He wound up in his current form after pulling machines, minerals, and meteorites from his surroundings towards him. So starting right away with a small extra detail about Zora, maybe you could sort of guess this from its design in the game, but this is not Zora's original form. Kinda makes you wonder what Zora originally looked like, but what's next is what's really important. Zora does not possess malicious intent, and neither does Galactic Nova for that matter. It was the same in Kirby Superstar, which he first appeared in. He's a machine that simply receives requests as external commands, and then does everything in his power to grant them. In other words, the incident that occurs midway through Road Trip implies the involvement of another malicious force that seeks to dominate or even annihilate planet Popstar. And well, there are all kinds of scenarios which I hope I will have the chance to share publicly someday. So as we can see, the Kirby leads have not yet managed to kick their bad habit of leaving crucial information out of the games and revealing it later in interviews. In case you need a refresher, when you're playing Road Trip, you only get a couple of cutscenes which tell the story of how Zora wished to be free and roam wherever it pleased after being trapped on Popstar for ages. This wish eventually reaches the Fountain of Dreams, and through the fountain's power, the wish reaches Galactic Nova, the wish-granting mechanical comet. However, instead of just granting the wish normally, Galactic Nova, let's make sure I get this right, manufactures a ton of vehicles, the air ride machines, then sends them raining down as meteors across Popstar, which actually just destroys many of them. But others are found by riders and activate when they share the rider's will. Then, once those become a common form of transportation on Popstar, Galactic Nova sends like 10 giant metal drop pods with robot spider drones and ships carrying materials to tear Zora apart and then reassemble it into Gigantus, a massive vehicle which is also a weapon capable of destroying all life on the planet, which Zora's will is still trapped in, unable to move. Because Gigantus is so big, it requires a lot of willpower to activate, so Galactic Nova sends out a signal which commands all the vehicles to travel to Gigantus, bringing their riders with them, which should bring enough willpower to activate it. And this ends up being the reason the rider you choose at the beginning of Road Trip starts their journey at all. Now, it ends up being the case that when Zora was being torn apart, a fragment of its will broke free and formed into Noir DDD. It's not really clear how Zora knows what DDD looks like, but knowing the risk posed by Gigantus, Noir DDD destroys every vehicle that tries to return to Zora. Of course, they can't stop the player who eventually reaches Gigantus, and from here the story branches into a sort of normal ending and true ending. The first time you play, the rider will defeat Gigantus, which causes Noir DDD to disappear, leaving Zora apparently dead, and Galactic Nova just leaves. But if you collect all the machines in New Game Plus, Gigantus absorbs the air ride machines to become Hyper Gigantus, and Noir DDD summons the Dragoon and Hydra, one of which the player can use to defeat Gigantus. After that happens, it flips to face straight up, and Noir DDD drives directly into it, causing it to shoot a beam of light into Galactic Nova. Also, another legendary machine called Leo just appears, which looks like a fiery lion for some reason. Yeah, I know at the end here stuff kinda just happens, but stick with me, we're almost done. The player rides Leo up the beam of light towards Galactic Nova, refighting all the bosses until they enter Nova and take out its core. We see Nova explode and the player return to Popstar, and in the wreckage of Gigantus, Zora's will reunites, and all the machines reactivate as Zora reassembles into its old meteor form before shooting up into space. After watching this, the player hops on Leo and rides towards the horizon, roll credits. Alright, that story summary ended up taking a bit longer than I wanted it to, but it was important for me to get every detail just so you can see that there's really no implication given at any point of some malicious third party interfering with Galactic Nova and causing the events of Road Trip. Naturally, this resulted in a lot of people assuming that Nova itself was the one making this elaborate scheme to destroy Popstar, which led to a lot of jokes and memes about Nova being a monkey's paw or just outright evil, which I have to admit I participated in a little myself. But at face value, Sakurai's comments here suggest that Nova really is just granting a wish given to it from an external source, which is more in line with previous appearances. Going back to Kirby Superstar, we don't really know what Nova was gonna do after Mark's wish to control Popstar since the sun and moon stop it from approaching the planet. But in Meta Nightmare Ultra, when Meta Knight wishes to fight the greatest warrior in the galaxy, Nova just grants this with no catch. But if Nova is cleared of all charges, that raises the question of who the true villain of Air Riders is, because there's really not any obvious option other than Nova that we see in the game itself. Taking a closer look at what Sakurai said, we know that this villain wants to dominate or destroy Popstar, and that they were in some way responsible for how Galactic Nova conducted its wish granting, which is presumably what the incident is referring to. This last line seems to me, at least, to be Sakurai suggesting that he might want to expand on this in a future game or other media someday, but it's kept so vague it doesn't really help us. And although this might not be the end of the full interview, this is the end of the section dedicated to the story mode, so I would be surprised if we get any more story details anytime soon. We're also left on our own to figure out why Nova didn't at least directly grant Zora's wish to move freely. If Nova really was just receiving and granting wishes directly, then it seems like either Zora's wish was corrupted by this malicious force, or this malicious force separately made a wish to destroy Popstar which reached Nova, and for some reason Nova ended up combining the two wishes in a weird way. Personally, I kinda lean towards the second, Nova doing things like creating the air ride machines, which don't directly help Zora in any way, but are said to embody Zora's wish for freedom and movement, read to me like some elements from Wish A being combined with elements from Wish B. Either way, some failure of communication definitely happened, but we can't speculate too much since we don't know anything about the malicious force other than that it probably desires to destroy Popstar. So let's see if we can get ahead of Sakurai and answer exactly who or what that malicious force is. Obviously, he could just be giving us a hint towards an entirely new villain that we haven't seen before and that we just can't know yet. But putting that aside, since it'd kill all theory crafting to assume, is there anyone that we do know that it could be? Well, in my opinion, we do have a couple of contenders, so without further ado, let's take a look at our lineup. Suspect number 1, Nightmare. This guy was the main villain of Kirby's Adventure and its remake, Nightmare in Dreamland. In that game, Nightmare infects the Fountain of Dreams, which normally gives blissful dreams to all the Dreamlanders, in order to torment the residents by giving them bad dreams instead. DDD actually manages to stop Nightmare by taking the Star Rod from the fountain and breaking it into pieces, but this prevents the Dreamlanders from having dreams at all, and prompts Kirby to begin his adventure. Of course, Kirby eventually fixes the Star Rod and places it back on the Dream Fountain, releasing Nightmare, but it's all fine since Kirby defeats Nightmare and only blows up about a fourth of the moon in the process, leaving him free to return the Star Rod and save the day. Why is this important? Well, Nightmare does show up as a boss in Air Riders, where he's given the title King of Bad Dreams. You might even end up fighting him twice in Road Trip if you go for the best ending, once at the end of Crystal Clear Crossing and again in the final boss rush. But he doesn't really do anything besides that. The Dream Fountain also shows up very briefly, but plays an important role since it seems like Zora's wish is passed to the Dream Fountain before being sent to Galactic Nova. Handling wishes does seem to be sort of a new function for it, but I guess that's covered since wishes are a kind of dream, although that's different from sleeping dreams. Anyway, maybe you could argue that the true plot of Road Trip plays out like this. Nightmare wasn't truly defeated at the end of Adventure, and at some point later ends up corrupting the Dream Fountain once again. Because of this, when Zora's wish reaches the fountain, it somehow gets twisted from a wish to move freely into this elaborate scheme to destroy Popstar. This wish is the one which ends up being received by Galactic Nova, and then all the events of the game happen. This would explain why some elements of Zora's wish are preserved, but there are definitely several issues. First, Nightmare has never really expressed any intention of destroying Popstar in the game, so this doesn't really seem like the sort of thing he would do intentionally. In Adventure, he just seemingly wants to cause general suffering by giving everyone bad dreams. Even his parallel counterpart from the more recent Super Kirby Clash doesn't seem to have much of a goal beyond causing trouble by getting a bunch of beasts to rampage through the Dream Kingdom. As a side note, this actually would be pretty in line with Nightmare's motives in the anime Kirby Right Back At Ya. There he wants to take over the universe and tries to outright destroy Dreamland in a couple different ways, but the anime is a different continuity from the games, so this isn't the most solid evidence. This also doesn't really account for why the wish is so specific about how Popstar is destroyed, and it would be kind of awkward to end up defeating the true villain of the game twice before even reaching the final boss. So maybe we should move on to our next potential villain, suspect number 2, Marx. Marx is an obvious choice to look at since he's one of the only characters who has a history with Nova. In Milky Way Wishes, Marx tricks Kirby into summoning Galactic Nova so he can make a wish to control Popstar. Nova flies towards Popstar but is held in place by the sun and moon. Kirby enters Nova and destroys its core, then defeats Marx, launching him into Nova, causing this famous explosion. However, this doesn't seem to actually kill Marx, since he shows up later as a dream friend in Star Allies, and of course he's a playable character as well as a boss right here in Air Riders, where you can potentially fight him twice in the story mode like Nightmare. Since we know Marx has a history of trying to use Galactic Nova, maybe Marx separately wished to control Popstar again after Galactic Nova somehow returned. And this wish somehow ended up combining with Zora's, resulting in the events of Road Trip. This would make a nice parallel to one of the last Kirby games Sakurai was heavily involved in, but it still has some issues. Looking at motive again, there is probably some reason to think Marx still wants to take over Popstar, but there's no indication he wants to destroy it. In fact, Star Allies suggest that while Marx might still be planning something bad, he'll be your friend if you simply share food with him, and he even sets out to save the galaxy himself after sensing danger from a distant star in guest star mode. So he doesn't really seem malicious enough to destroy all life on Popstar, at least to me. Also, again, this suffers from the issue where you will be defeating the true evil partway through the campaign, and it's even more strange since Marx himself is a playable character. You would maybe expect something in the game to acknowledge this if Marx actually is involved in the plot, like a secret ending for beating Road Trip while playing as him. Okay, well, let's take a look at suspect number 3, Dark Matter and Zero. This one's a little more tenuous. Zero and Dark Matter's power and intentions aren't super clearly explained in any of the games they appear in, but they generally seem to try and take over various planets, invading Dreamland in Kirby's Dream Land 3 and Ripple Star in Kirby 64, and Dark Matter is able to possess the living creatures of any planets they invade. It's not super clear why they would want to destroy all life, but maybe using their power they were able to somehow manipulate Nova to twist Zora's wish. Zero 2 also shows up as a boss in Road Trip, but it's important to note this new design it has. It seems like the version of Zero 2 we fight here has a lot of digital sci-fi effects, with its body being constructed from this polygon particle effect. Combined with this digital cyberspace environment, literally it's a location called Digital Superhighway, that you fight it in, and the computery sound effects that the boss intro has, it really looks like this Zero 2 is an imposter, some sort of hologram copy, maybe one created by Galactic Nova to stop the writer. Of course, that's kind of an issue for our theory, because if this is a hologram, that means Dark Matter and Zero don't show up at all in Air Riders, and as far as we know, Zero 2 died forever back in Kirby 64. But with that, I'm kinda completely out of characters from the game itself. We know Zora and Nova are innocent, there aren't really any other writers that would have the motive to hatch a plot like this, and I doubt it's any of the standard enemies from the game. I mean, Kracko might hate Kirby with every one of his water particles, but destroying all of Popstar is going a bit too far even for him. I thought of mentioning Star Dream just because its motive is explicitly to destroy all organic life in Kirby Planet Robobot, but Star Dream is pretty definitively destroyed at the end of Robobot and doesn't show up at all in Air Riders. So with that, I've pretty much got to turn it over to you guys. What do you think of this interview? Do you think Sakurai has some new villain planned for a Kirby project in the future? And if so, how did they end up affecting Zora's wish? Or will we never get an answer for this at all? Honestly, I don't know. Let me know your ideas in the comments below, and I'm gonna get back to working on my next real video. Okay, since you made it to the end of the video, you get to know the truth. This comment from Sakurai obviously means that Robo-DDD is the real villain behind Air Riders. That's right, Robo-DDD was so jealous of Noir DDD being the cooler DDD impersonator in its own game that it created the Gigantus scheme to ensure that all organic life would be destroyed, and robots would rule Popstar while Zora remained trapped in Gigantus for all of eternity. Using its robot hacking power, it was the malicious being who manipulated Nova into granting the wish to end Popstar as we know it, and it would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for our incredible hero, the writer. Okay, that's it, bye.